15-minute warning, folks. Ten-minute warning. It's report time. 5-minute warning.
180 cent. Is there anyone not good? All right, sweet. Advantage world of Russian specialization nuclear preemption is defensive posture exponentially raises like looting nuclear use at 20 nuclear thresholds, Moscow threshold may drop further new weapons or nuclear rushes and nuclears in the conflict despite COVID pursuit training threat in NATO. The RDM simulated launch was fighting Mark 1 near NATO probably doing exist high because you agree and again it's all threshold for nuclear use, no break between conventional nuclear. The RVC voted for a preemptive strategy against NATO doctrine laws for first you've done the threat the policies defensive habiters and burn escalation, extensive analysis, Russian strategic doctrine and internal documentation, military posture, verified defensive shift to preemption, NATO ski burger, integrating 18 articles target preemption documents, the condition for preemptive strike again destroying NATO, the Russian target ground air and CCC and satellites presumption. Preemption differs from the U.S. uses multiple statement strikes. It is not excluded preemption because they're reached by decision makers, military lobby. Authorized strikes, the analysts should not do such preemptions. Classified doctrine, Russia access. Best chances render Russia's not adopt preemption. May term, near term, if turns place the defense at disadvantage in Moscow, no choice but to compensate for weak defense. Russia accepts right preemptive capabilities 5 times. Reports show to persuade near retreat preemptions, real investment deep strike, indicate desire to attack global nuclear warfare. 18 any sort of NATO contingency to preemption. NATO is equipped to take a time for Russian fierce survivability rather than give the West opportunity to strike. They move for cyber, hypersonic, electro, and energy weapons leadership. Exists in citizens. Japanese should made up a nuclear weapon preemption would create risk of war, difficult overseas misfire, collision, pocket flights, spill over, nuke tech, create ambiguity, need to first act first, leave Moscow to use force before confirm NATO attack is admitted, use policymakers put preemption such reciprocal fear, increased risk of misconduct, nuclear preemption led to Russian war, policymakers fail, lose pressure, such urgent space satellites, escalate to nuclear, only Russian war constant extinction, Bear 17, use Russia, aftermath could spend this week at the efforts to cause global cooling, and ozone loss, active disruption, nuclear winter exchange, fourth house of weapons, impossible to grow food, and extinction is only possible, 90% of weapons, regional wars, unlikely to lead to extinction, even absent nuclear use, escalates to uncontrollable drone swarms, such electric war, and hypersonic strikes, fails to create 18 strategy, believe NATO is trying to prevent Russia's top Russian thinkers are predictor analysis, step house treaty, strategists perceive the environment as war, future war with NATO take place, the drones, electromagnetic hypersonics strike Russia, the offense will have advantage, defense are likely to protect Russia, allow enemy to attack Russia, may have limited options, 2 ways to neutralize the turn, except for fears concerned about survivability, structure, autonomous system, target, delivery vehicles, the plan is firmly declaratory policy, there shows Russian modernization while laying fears of preemptive strikes, who's in 16, the important taxes when deterring Russia's aim, keeping NATO cohesive, put together pressure on Russia, does not use nukes first, when NATO would be stronger, we talk about nuclear war, Russians no longer appeal to our European people coalition to keep NATO against Russia, not do attack with nukes because our strategy is not NATO. The emphasize nukes use that is signified Russian ways to use Russia. Enable advancements nukes and a different declaratory policy put onus on Russia to top arm reaches advantage to use imminent current collective defense norms are temporary and begins permitting anticipatory activation. Article 5 of the generating global preventative war only narrowing activation 12 to 9 TP on scope defense license. Certainty question whether Article 5 may be supported before attack this asylum. Article 51 allows interstory action challenges when right matures consider proximity use force for instance necessary for leaving no choice improvement for deliberation despite sparking off for attack is likely no warning visible catastrophic observations undermine reconsideration temporal alternative is a treat anticipatory defense as three conditions first capability second to 10 final opportunity opportunity on the kill limits governing the scope of anticipatory activation boards to preemptive defense that exceeds conditions for justifiable near preemption leaves no checks on preemptive force 6 if no conditions are satisfied such may justify unilateral force of use try to use beyond NATO made their case for strikes even when uncertainty remains as to this time and place of attack that when no reason exists to believe a threat is imminent or probable the recourse would be prevented no preempting a credible threat fulfilling threats to occur at a sudden uncertain time is not offensive not tactical and contrary to the standard for imminence this is not a matter of degree but a different order doctrine lacks any clarity as the scope of such a vacant defense increase abuse only weapon way to action so capable of legal security leading to insecurity that causes nuclear escalation every day and widely modeled group to 20 doctrine entails consequences for peace so decisions separating preemption from aggression gives leverage to any country that opens window for now checks by all the signs raised ensure about the country's race preemption is a cover for setting wars until administration define line it brings a license to intervene nations take advantage of this China Taiwan India Pakistan Russia rules are banned any country might use with might is free it cannot be interested to grant every nation unfettered preemption depression and crushes UN legitimacy and multilateralism to 20 doctrines in tune with the UN implies status having multilateralism opposed to threats to stability and credibility of UN calls for power without legitimacy and multilateralism Bush failed to anticipate reaction inside stepping and taxes invent escalation threats to run the community it is unsustainable but harmful not augur well for the UN extinction Morgan 19 Korea Iran Russia are trying to turn to configuration AI will lead to humans climate lead to extinction threats are real non-direct actually guaranteed to survive the century cooperation is essential the only attack existential threats is common understanding needs require multilateral responses pro growth super slugs genetic engineering engineering, migration, and trade. UN legitimacy, stabilizes hotspot escalation, global 13. UN plays central role in challenges to terrorism, proliferation, peace, and poverty. UN has a central role in post-conflict transition, reducing escalation. UN is the only organization that brings together to solve problems. You have to go to all players at the table. Preventive activations violate the law, rules of necessity and proportionality. Rose and 18 military must comply with the law. The force is permitted under two circumstances or authorized or in self-defense or response to armed attack. The U.S. is a doctrine permitting preventive war under Article 51. Preemptive taxes control for Russia will illegal when in response to early armed attack and beyond legal preventative war necessity and proportionality requirements are inherent and lawful. A war less and left destructive option is available. It must be chosen. Attack must be not because that's in scale. Requirement to not rule out all use of nukes. There should be threshold. It should be a high threshold. That ends the doctrine. Met 17. Preventive action. Constant no base denial. The Bush should not claim the broad right to strike those little terms. They not for low when a small nation launches the system is brute, but survives. The U.S. violates law will be making this because no nation will feel bound by shadow or cascading effects. Law regulates autonomous weapons extinction. Garcia 988 applications lead to access to risk of fierce competition for supremacy, cooperation between Austrians, armed and autonomous weapons, unlimited potential to change life on Earth. Errors and errors in coding, undergo hacking, and cyber attack. Regular forces lead to warfare duties to ensure regulations, consensus with weapons, and by law, we can face armed races leading to proliferation. India borrows U.S. legal justifications will strike Pakistan, who give the 20 Pakistan claim right to protect India's better case against Pakistan than the U.S. Version over the claim as would dismiss right to strike oath that cannot be generalized. The U.S. condemned enough to deter New Delhi advocating the world polity minus UN as the demise would make Kashmir resolutions of nuclear war. Appeal 19 tension escape detestation power city be revoked commitment to use nuclear retaliation reverse and greater explosive ambiguity renders it meaningless. Pakistan and mass nuclear missiles too rarely speaking. The relations been a knife. Even a small change, not a safe and needed forms of change. Pakistan take a signal indicate prompt that prompt Pakistan to use all nukes. You get destabilizing dynamic. The political doctrine proposed to limit application Israel, Palestine, Iran, North Korea, Sudan, China, and Afghanistan will all escape into the starts global terrorism. Groups of 20 doctrine failed to deter contrary, but U.S. confrontation application pride devastating for terrorists, shaping generation of operatives, susceptible to increase and spread of the virus. America destabilize the Middle East and percent of the tension creating crisis. When the doctrine weaken America, limited options and reunited hotspots seriously Palestine, Iran, North Korea, Sudan, China, and Afghanistan. Extinction barriers and 19 nuclear spares, full scale nuclear war in response to government strikes territory, strongholds. The response goes, the region goes to blade conflict, escalate nuclear U.S. reaction, nuclear conflict ensued that involve every nuclear state. When it's time the entire species after the effects of render planet hotspot the planet prudently narrows into support activation while clarifying the conditions for legitimate authorization of preemptive collective defense. Reckon 6 minutes may be broadly two factors: gravity and delivery. Temporal center by private state for an opportunity to repel attack quickly because ILS should not to give a criteria balance for aggression. Under self-defense criteria should be agreed to self-defense may trigger only when threat can be identified, serious, probable, determined capabilities, intent of threshold will be higher than imminence is less applied. The nature of the threat, likelihood of the threat will realize unless preventive action, whether consistent with the UN violating defense, will have a higher proof to avert attack. Imminent should remain, although gravity and delivery need to be included. The standards must be agreed upon a framework of any actions regardless of that threat, including magnitude, capacities, intent, proximity, likelihood, intelligence, exhaustion, and compatibility. Consciousness is needed to modify the council's power to deal with a lack of objective threshold. Preventive action should be with authorization clear with objective criteria must be developed. Action should be only acceptable only after evidence until mechanisms are established. The government's overstretch limit security bind with reinterpretation doctrine enable states to respond effectively. Advantage 3. NATO's interpretation of Article 5 is permitting anti-support activation splits the alliance. YAS 7 NATO's recognized need for preventive action to support remains controversial and raises the question of warrants in NATO. It is agreed upon the United States price grounds for force allies not agreed upon unilaterals and pride to cause for France and Germany held authorization was necessary. In contrast, the United States held that they had authority to split the U.S. European divide. NATO quoted Article 51 and noted lawfulness as long as attack and imminent problem arises where a threat is no imminent but real. Can a state claim that their right is act in defense, not just preemptively, but preventively? If their arguments they should be put to the Council, the rest of global order is too great for preventive action. Article 51 question to resolve should the regime be modified. Allies justify actions by interpretations of Article 51. It rose the geographic advantages activation. Yes, 10 Article has historically been about Article 6 geographic area in which armed attack oblige allies to honor Article 5. Allies adopt policies that lead to deteriorization, moving forces quickly wherever they needed suggested indirect interest in action at their point of origin. NATO allies approved measures to strengthen ability to be challenges from wherever they may come into support. Article 5 become explicit in 2003, meaning given to defense and transition. NATO Secretary General Sheffer said Article 5 can be applied outside NATO territory as much as inside. That causes Iran, Russia, China war. Kuhn in 116. The NATO's intervention efforts in Afghanistan and Iraq was already a failure. Iran, Russia, China viewed NATO as a foray as hostile since they never to pacify Middle East would only be possible if the stakeholders were on board. Right now, that is high. That Middle East seems to enter 30 years war. The legal authorities destabilizes Gordon in 1016 shall lead to many consequences. Refugee flows undermine stability. Weapons flooded from Middle East. It led to states to crack down brutally. Opposition forces to the world's powerful alliances come to rescue of rebels. It broke a conflict overseas. Similar report that changes the equation. Graffiti starts appealing on Syrian walls. It's your turn. Bashar opposition believe it could be overthrown. His own dictator within NATO come to its rescue. Thus the plan. Citing Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, the United States federal government should reduce this alliance commitments to North Atlantic organization member states by at least substantially limited conditions under which its defense act be activated in anticipation of armed attack. Extinction Heat 20 Red Sea 10% of global trade, strategic and military competition raises the possibility of conflict rivalry from Egypt to Djibouti, adding to volatility. Sudan, increasing problematic. Turkey and Gulf nations remains a tug of war. U.S., China, Russia, Japan, and Italy secured bases. Djibouti is a true powder keg for conflict. Shifting alliances and competition increases conflict.
Okay, I'm going to start cross-fixes prep and then I'll ask questions.
Yeah.
Okay, are you good?
Yeah.
What is the best card that is like firmly understood that the app is a current commitment and not just like discussed?
Raphael?
If by current commitment you mean it's able to be activated anticipatorily, Schmidt.
Okay, and
We also
like
have cases where
what
it's
is
happened.
okay? What are the current conditions that would activate for?
So ones that have historically legitimated preventative interventions, including the US or NATO arguing that an adversary is in the last window where they could be prevented before they maybe develop WMD or attack the United States. Additionally, we've justified preventative wars on the basis of adversary intent and adversary capability historically.
Okay, why does Russia really care about whether the U.S. like changes to NATO in terms of whether it develops its own stuff? Like, I get that Lewis says they are like afraid of the U.S., but why do they believe that the plan is, like firm?
Because we allay their fears of preventative nuclear strikes or invasion.
Okay.
Should be sent. The order is 8, Russia, Eminence, Collective Defense.
Alex, the doc that you sent has 2 off and then nothing else. So I'm imagining it's the wrong doc.
Let me resend it.
Alex, you said 8.
Yes.
Okay.
Is anyone not ready?
Yes, I need to download the new doc.
Yeah, I don't have it yet either.
Okay, I'm good now.
Is everyone else good?
Vagueness absent to specify precise detail and condition they impose to order specified minister governed by eliminating strategies based off commitment to certain class, which is where prerequisites of debate to benefit means they solve nothing writer. 19 why some condition but others there's important variance across different conditions of underlines where they consider elements of geographic area that interest and uncertainty about compliance with use in precise terms without defining the error, understanding completeness, making treaty more incomplete is important because incompleteness may reduce compliance rather than clarify treaties. So democracy sometimes muddy the water. T alliance commitments as formal and explicit provision in the text of the treaty marks case to form an alliance where they concluded treaty obliges them to take certain action in the event of war. Alliance are explicit record of allies expectations specified conditions they must believe they will live up to alliance commitments. Alliances should be differentiated from alignments. Alignments are not written down in alliance until formal commitment wherein specific obligations are written out. Alliances require specification from alignment to alliances. Several informalization of commitment reduce must limit current alliance. Pappuccini 18 means to stop something from happening. Reduce means to make something smaller. The term prevents just an action to stop future consent, whereas a reduced point to an action that has already happened continues to occur but needs to be smaller. But neg alliance needs to make a moderate modification to alliances causes limits explosion allowing hundreds or added condition or tinker around the edge of the alliance tabs that don't link to core position making stable neg prep impossible to limit defense pacts directly obligates us states to defend their alliance partners. Spelling 13 in defense pacts where states in a diet are required to come to defense of another state of attack. The defense pact is clear in terms of the meaning and obligations that requires a limitation on causes for risk like Him11 condition for activation of alliance are hardly triple. Alliance are not activated unless certain conditions are met. Many situations do not constitute causes for dare situation in terms of an alliance are activated states specify alliance obligation condition HE specific adversary specific location on provocation by not like the plan modifies the scope and extent of U.S. action regardless of activation terms. Bergsman one in an alliance performance it has to be distinguished actual behavior shown by the state once the cause of orders has occurred promise compromise assistance in the event specified how is this is done and what kind of research recovery. It's not that important voting issue for elements that there's an endless number of tweaks that ask can make to overall alliance posture without explicitly modifying the exact activation condition of the defense by which obviates the core topic question prevents any genuine stable basis for neg prep advantage conflict. The United States federal government should privately communicate to Russia that it will not use nuclear weapons in conflict. The politics DA Biden's gearing up for infrastructure. It's not top priority. According to 325, Biden made it clear successful president have been successful because they know how to time what they're doing is a decade priorities. What needs to be done in the next major initiative to rebuild infrastructure. It'll pass with PC's key colon 21 to power that 6 centers. Senators on both parties will realize that these politicians can be described as pragmatists. Their cow cloud as steelmakers counter meeting in the middle of the expected crowd votes to wrangle concession bills across the finish line, helping drive the general will be Biden himself. The president does have political capital to spend on pushing in policies. He has to know how to orchestrate in, but I hope votes in Congress given that the outlook of this year for passing a significant infrastructure bill appears whereas that in a long time, none of these are Senate. There's a lot of negotiation and compromise to be done, but Biden policy initiative absence on point from which the bipartisan campaign to drive legislation across Capitol Hill onto the White House. The plan structures unity. Waldorf 20 debates by Grant Sarchi Center on reduction of alliance commitments. Basically challenging future domestic politics. If ideas already mentioned, lead them on the outside storm pressure exists for them to Trump partisan idea. Trump's bipartisan ideas restrained do not say well, bigger majority support U.S. alliances, which restrain its criticize restrain as value for setting for balance remain interest ignoring these costs and politically restrain its danger of being liberal. It's a politically devastating broad public narrative call for liberal order. It could get even more pronounced. Heated anti-China dispersing an anti-authoritarian narrative that could spread Cold War nature proposal get replaced by alliance commitments. It's our last best bet to stop warming. Economists 21 now begin protozomes facing energy in America, growing for extreme weather infrastructure as well. America needs both a cleaner grid and more reliable one. America's a source of leadership. What it's about to unfold. Washington will set the course in America for the next second beyond the time of sourcing either by nor. Sixers are going to get a second chance. It will be even harder to limit to less than 2 degrees of delaying action when media overshoots. There are grounds for hope and ambitious climate oriented infrastructure bill looks like Biden's best chance of to act away. Bringing reverse would make America less competitive. America would also be part of influence over climate. If America tables goals and gives evidence will bring them it will gain influence. There will never be able to chance extinction threat. 19 scale of destruction of human civilization coming to an end. The world will be overwhelmed by pandemic disease, internal creation, rise of migration, changing water availability, arm calming the over resources likely nuclear war is possible. Poland, horse trading DA, Biden is backing, balking at increasing military presence in Poland to the status quo, refocusing on China. Milwaukee, 316 Trump understood the strong closure armed forces translated to more freedom for the U.S. to face China. We would pivot to the Pacific. Washington would maintain enough troops and hardware in Europe to continue to serve as a deterrent. Biden so far has backed out sending more GIs to Poland, setting up a serious U.S. military base. Biden will react to the panel by reassuring NATO with increasing military pressure blanket-ship. 3-4 Biden's efforts to reaffirm the support for the alliance. It says significant reassurance that reinforcing alliance is treated by demonstrating Washington's willing to accumulate resource on allies. We have one tools deploying U.S. forces. There are subject to rapid change, leaving allies with concern about future U.S. troop level statements are more symbolic, creating reputational cause allies. Seek reassurance as circumstances change.
was the enemy research or those in high threat environments or those without doubts about U.S. commitments. U.S. there's certainly a continued view of reassurance as a useful policy lever for future interests. They go to Poland Gore 20. Where would additional U.S. forces be deployed? Poland, centerpiece of NATO, increasing assumed by Poland, one of the most so-aware members of the alliance. For no NATO ally has more to improve the defensive posture than Poland and Warsaw recognized its place as centerpiece of the alliance defensive line vis-a-vis Russia. That triggers Russia war. Pyramid 18 of the plans reference its own base in Poland with great class security elements. That's why discharge the hostility between sides would mean abandoning RFA significantly strengthening Moscow's resolve to have Russia with military calling God Belarus out of permanent military Russian president the U.S. established a base in Poland. Martinenko would find increasingly difficult with finding it harder to maintain its guarantee that there will be no military attack on Ukraine. Pledge is important because they lost Ukraine to shift its attention resources away from northern border and towards conflict zone in Donbass. For Trump could increase the risk of Ukraine and escalation war between Ukraine and Russia could be even more disastrous for Kiev than otherwise would have been. ICJ counterplayed the United States government should seek a domestically legal binding Article 361 ruling from the International Criminal Court regarding the legality of the current commitment to North Atlantic Treaty Organization member states by at least substantially limiting the condition under which its defense pact can be activated in anticipation of an armed attack. That solves UN 14 Article 361 the jurisdiction of the Court of Compromise all cases which parties refer to parties 6 for their consent on an basis by means of social agreement requesting the court to adjudicate specific and define dispute. A counterplan prevents which Chinese and Russian control of ICJ. Anderson 18 the disengagement from ICJ could have long-term consequences. The U.S. has been to enhance the ability shaped by law. The disengagement states listing line support U.S. candidates to future U.S. unwilling to articulate and defend international legal basis actions create an impression that U.S. actions are less legally justifiable than they are. Such as seems particularly desirable. U.S. entering competition with China or Russia dialogue improved particularly useful of reinforcing rules of the world, organizing other states tactical. Hopefully, this may expand freedom of action for China and Russia to share institution avoid as screening of their human rights. It would better equip the U.S. successfully navigate global order as a proof quality of life from another world. I made the U.S. the premier superior power credible. ICJ self-serving commented UNGA 18 ICJ remains the highest judicial authority in the world at a time when human rights abuse and conflict devastate millions at once, such as some of the regions throughout the world. The education of disputes remain in such a role. The courts in pursuing peace and security effectiveness depends on compliance with its judgments. The court has averted the use of force and war interference of states have not accepted jurisdiction. We enroll the international community will respect the will of the court. The court's affirms the vital role of the U.S. UN main and judicial body and peace and security of the role while giving a current crisis and multi-use of force and treaty and church is more important than ever. Do you want me to go to the case? Russia advantage. The plan greenlights Russian aggression. They'll take the Baltics of Benedict 19 without clear command to defend allied territory backed by a nuclear deterrent. Who will seize the land abilities of Russia has already done this in Ukraine. Had they not joined the NATO, the Baltics would already be occupied by Russian major wars when aggressively miscalculated Hitler, North Korea, Hussein, and each case led to larger conflict, even absent U.S. on nuclear war. 317 could we have Mr. proximity mass conflict 371 Trump pulls the U.S. Avenue to Putin decides to himself to the Baltic states. He has now a long belief should be Russia 3 the rest of the lines UK, Germany, France, good their result Hiroshima and Nagasaki everywhere. Russia has been holding major nuclear drills. Putin believes that former Soviet states should have never become independent with America gone. They would move on to the Baltics states immediately. No Russia war will 20 Russia may raise its nuclear threshold. It's difficult to understand why Russia would pursue adventures and that would risk competition technologically advanced nuclear armed adversary like NATO while opportunistic and reckless. Putin does not appear suicide. Russia has invested considerable sums in developing conventional weapon to provide leadership with a buffer against reaching the nuclear threshold. Space conflict enabled. They don't solve RPOs and other ASAC capabilities, which makes conflict enabled. The eminent advantage violations are enabled again to have a plethora of violation perpetuated by every power each day. MTA allows nothing the U.S. alone on a daily basis violates every principle ever. Wars, aggression, turns torture, rendition, assassination, cells of war. The largest personnel population lists endless laws exist in theory, but not in practice, ignored by superpowers. No enforcement, no military force. Rain for rain sounds as effective as sending international principles to a lawless president, lack and redundant, irrelevant class or 9 explosive growth of bylaw, including prolific organization and courts, as well as development of new fields. Environmental human rights laws relegated laws of war to obscurity. South Asia stable security 20 their stability based on empirical record and deterrence 5%. India reacted with caution. Observers strictly limited to Indian territory for fear of escalation. End-to-end peaks at New Delhi were restrained from and Mumbai. PM rolled out military response to Uri attacks that were carefully calibrated. 2029 both were conscious to need to avoid escalation by refraining from air strikes. Pakistan moved down to Ranga, confidently directed at nuclear single no nuclear terror. They lack the means and motives and empirically disproven the collective advantage. U.S.-led I-law fails. Fuller 322 Washington certainly will make other countries hesitant to sign on to an American vision of proxy disturbing U.S. policy over 20 years. Co-consider Iraqi, Syria, Somalia, Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, collateral damage, endless intervention, assassination, such as Soleimani, Washington, exam, Israel, and Saudi Arabia, accession Islam includes color revolution, refusing law to right to the child. ICJ will cite the Seattle or Article 51, 99 failure to invoke Article 5 would not bar the members from defending an individual with self-defense or not preclude other allies from committing defense outside the North Atlantic framework. Mark it at framework.
Are you good?
Yeah.
Do AFs need to be both of your T interpretations to be topical or just one?
Each topicality argument is distinct from one another. They're not together.
That's not an answer to the question.
repeat your question then.
Do AFs need to meet both of your interpretations to be topical or just one?
Are you talking about like separately or like the
There are two T flows. If an AF meets one T flow but violates the other, is it topical?
No, because one of our
Okay, so
T
AFs have
arguments
to
is
meet
about
every
alliance
definition.
commitments,
So
and
AFs have
another
to meet
argument
every
is about
definition you've
limiting
read.
defense packs.
Okay, so AFs have to meet every definition you've read. Okay.
Status, net benefits.
The status quo is always a logical option. You write a new AF, we get to do whatever we want.
I mean, that doesn't mean you automatically get to win, but sure. Net benefits.
Everything's a net benefit.
Okay. Politics, your 1NC internal evidence is about PC with Republicans. Why does the GOP cooperate now?
Our evidence says that Biden has the political capital to influence other Republicans that might not want to pass infrastructure, but our evidence says that infrastructure is his top priority and it will pass now.
Okay, so you just said Biden has PC. Okay, so how is the infrastructure bill going to be paid for?
Our evidence says like there would be negotiations and compromising to be done to determine funding.
How? Like negotiating and compromising on what?
Like as to how much should be invested in infrastructure.
Where does the money come from is my question.
I don't know. They would probably find the money someplace.
Okay, it seems like it comes from.
Our evidence says that Biden has said that he would invest $400 billion over 10 years in energy research. So it's probably part of that plan.
And the money for that plan comes from where?
It's like already delegated.
Already
I'm not sure where
delegated.
it comes from, but it's already delegated because Biden has the funds to do it.
Okay. Okay, what is the link? If the plan is implemented by a member of the executive and doesn't require Biden to push Congress, then why does Biden have to spend PC?
Well, Biden would still have to spend PC because our Waldorf evidence says that the plan would trigger debates among Congress and the plan would have to go through Congress in order to be implemented.
Why?
Because that's how the it's the aspirin to provide normal means evidence that it would be entirely the executive and not go through Congress. Our evidence says that reductions in alliance commitments empirically go through Congress and that those would invite.
Which card says that?
Waldorf.
Where's the line?
For the Congress part?
Yeah. Where's that reduction? Like what you just said, reductions in alliance commitments normally go through Congress or historically have gone through Congress.
I think the whole card is just talking about how Congress is in line with alliances and dislikes reductions.
That they might dislike them, but they don't normally go through Congress, but that's fine.
It still requires a debate in order to be implemented.
10 minutes.
Did you read No Nuke Terror / Plan Doesn't Stop Intervention on Imminence?
No, I just made the analytic argument for
right, sweet. Yeah, thank you. That's it.
7:50. I'll send the doc. Tracy is sent. I'll give everyone a moment to pull it up, and then I'll give the order. Okay, the order is the Russia advantage, the imminence advantage, the collective defense advantage, T alliance commitments, T CASAS / defense pacts, vagueness, the advantage counterplan, the ICJ counterplan, the infrastructure politics disadvantage, the reassurance, the Polish troops reassurance disadvantage. Okay, do we all have it up? I'm gonna pan through the judges, and Wake, just let me know. Okay, get started then.
No, hold on, Bricker. Oh, okay. No.
Ricker, you are in fact good? Okay, sweet. Offensive posture sparks nuclear escalation, Russia counterbalances NATO and shifts electronic warfare as well as their own escalate de-escalate doctrine, turns and packages, it makes escalation more likely in every theater, which is a drop scenario. There deterrence GA, other commitments, check it. We still defend Baltics, post plan, no card says we have to preempt them over that. That would cause a war now and to be in the Baltic region because they board Russia, so it turns out scenario, no invasion. In 17, that attack is highly unlikely. Russia have the desire to invade. Russia has been investing billions, ability ports, using Petersburg, with this and the not needed anymore, exception for seaports will never anything really important. Does not make sense to count the Baltics after money was spent alternative type of warfare. Can only be used the Baltics, Kremlin had to build up its own forces, a war, NATO, Russian forces are a defensive ancient to boot. Russia have to fight the alliance. Russia's nuclear posture is defensive now. Historical trends, recent military statements, and internal documents as well as green. Only NATO posture causes them to adopt revanchist ambitions, which in turn turns the DA. No expansion of concessions. Solve Carter 18. Russia is weak. Hostile policies, poison relations. The Soviet Union was a global power, weak and capabilities. Russia is regional with limited reach. Ambitions are focused on the creep of NATO intrusions on Russia's security zone orientation. Seems defensive. It would be difficult to next year more than limited. And even has one of Russia's economy the size of Canada's and recruiters. The territory being half population is shrinking. Afflicted health problems arrival. There is no evidence Putin wants to suicidal Russia's intentions are overlap with America's leaders. Do not expand NATO. America stumbles into war because of now that they image and policy. Yes, provocations, Russia war and space conflict. No card assumes nuclear prevention that forces Russia to escalate to de-escalate. Their dominant fear is regime survival and they'll react with border strikes. No evidence substantiates the all-cost of space where they have to read cards saying those things are escalatory and we restrain their preemptive use, which is the key internal link to any space conflict. That's fellow screen. The imminence advantage. The plan solves other violations both by citing Article 51, which makes ally binding in the U.S., interpreting the phrase armed attack, which applies to both self and collective defense, and vetoing contrary activations. Countries will not initiate absent U.S. support. That's our Yoast evidence. U.S. limitations are modeled Code 16 how does the community prevent others from following preventative war. The U.S. most important leader, U.S. influence and behavior of others when hegemon promotes a conduct alters a frame for everyone behaviors become rules. We also get good faith durable fiat key before losing rollback. In circumvention, they've dropped the impact level nuclear prevention. Escalates all dyads. Taiwan soon on the broader Horn of Africa. Yes, South Asian instability. India will strike Pakistan. No defense assumes it. And it unravels Pakistan nuclear doctrine. Yes, nuclear differences assume it. ACAP resurgence from preventative strikes. The collective defense advantage plan reverses U.S. epoxy on collective defense. The only relevant cards they cited are the internal link to our scenario, and the alt causes they cited are remedied by the plan and imposed. The arguments all above are also answered here. The Olympics are all dropped. Iran regime change as well as MENA instability. All go nuclear. All cause extinction. The Chi page we meet. This just begs the question of the second violation. Activating upon armed attack is the promise in the treaty commitments or probabilistic and have inherent ambiguity. Clarifying the limits of scope. And 11 alliances differ. Unnecessary triggers are the unconditional alliances not specified in condition and permit preemptive force perceptions are subjective. Causes various activative and aggressive motives. 64 conditional alliances and the top data says holding 12,842 observations. The Proposed amendments leave uncertainty whether members will intervene. Alliance amendments is de facto, jury apparent, and de facto House 93. The categories 1 to 2 House none to apparent, no, not backing. These are political commitments, and 3 de facto, which was positions to make it infeasible to refrain from action. Reduce means shorten the extent. Roger 13 to cause they grow less, make shorter the duration and extent of. Can means possibility, actually, and expressing a possibility or absence of prohibitive conditions. No F meets their interpretation. Every commitment is probabilistic. China might never attack the Philippines, might never defend the Baltics, etc., or they could forfeit their territory. They're all conditioned on the existence of the state. Their evidence is also imprecise. Our above Haussmann card says that there are no de facto commitments in the SCRO ground in terms of key to flexibility and innovation to sail and neg bias topic is the opener of the limit solvency advocates article 5 credibility G8 set reasonability avoids crowd out. All arguments from both T approaches are cross applicable. Their interp became a global T flow in cross examination. Now T costs we meet the anticipation of arm attack is triggering condition that invokes A5 in the SCRO plan in the vacuum is the only non-arbitrary standard which stops next 10 backing conditions limits circumstances that invoke the pack writer 19 conditions limit circumstances that under which obligations are invoked in the alliances or circumstances on which a signatory required to intervene. NATO conditions refer only to those in case of armed attack specified by the charter parent 19 that article 5 NATO can be made on conditions of activation territorial scope of the obligation of the modalities of implementation collective defense stems from thresholds of activation to defense clause can be activated in case armed attack against the parties to the treaty. NATO on Article 5 NATO first Article 5 of the 51 of the UN Charter according to the UN Charter self-defense is permitted in case of an armed attack. Triggering these Article 5 of the 9/11 meant that is recognized that acts constitute an armed attack. The cyber attack, tantamount to armed attack, counter hybrid warfare, counter to invoke Article 5B under Article 5 armed attack and must originate from abroad. Defense pacts, legal agreements, and obligate response to contingency. Bruner 18 defense pact promises assistance and other agreement if conditions are met. Defense pact pledges the response to every impetus preferred. 1 logic every armed attack the cost is for dares because conditions are inherently uncertain. 2nd AFGRA needs flexibility to go with generics. Article 5 does not list triggers to no AF meets if limits all that matter then counter only or AF is topical. 3 arbitrariness or evidence defines language outside of institutional context. Cross apply all the relevant defense and offense. Now T vagueness we meet the citation of Article 51 as well as anticipatory activations as far specific than most AFs. Counter only specify as far as the res prefer it. 1 if no regression always asks for more kills clashing ground. 2 arbitrariness no res basis can't be predicted and it's unfair. 3 picks opens set the cheap shots and process counterpunts. 4 cross section solves the advocate check abuse. No presumption ballot all for evidence says the mandate of the plan sufficiently solves the writer evidence does not describe the AF. The advantage counterplan perm do both cannot solve advantage 2 or 3 did not include a solvency argument dropped every A5 key warrant. So brand new args in the 1 AR once they say how it solves NATO postures key falls green. 18 Russian leaders have debated what to do in NATO attack strategists believe the defense officer will stop attack. They're arguing for preemption to authorize territorial integrity. This would authorize first use nuclear attacks in NATO. Links to that benefit and leaks. Russia will disclose it to embarrass NATO, which is the premise of their deterrence page. Secret fiat is a voting issue. Unpredictable, aggressive, and kills clash. The ICJ counterplan. Permutation do both. Permutation do the counterplan. Permutation do the counterplan and other issues. They all must compete via text and function. Otherwise, it's regressive. Destroys affirmative ground. Allows for endless cheap shot counterplans that aren't germane to the plan. U.S. won't apply above 2721. ICJ has Biden to Trump shores in the last 17 days into his administration. Biden has neither rescinded Trump financial and visa sanctions against the ICC. The problem that comes down to practice attacks on critical components of U.S. policy in Israel. Biden is a big supporter of the U.S. military nation would give the Republican Party a major anti-tax point of attack. It's highly unlikely when it comes to actual policy. The international law man of Biden he found himself taking many of the same positions as Trump administration. They have no card. Any allies comply. They wouldn't if our unique arguments on the advantage 2 or advantage 3 are right. Biden has incentives to say no. Certain 1.2 man cheering on the Iraq war. The great Middle East is likely to remain on the status quo further than his later passport record of the national security picks for those foreign policy squad architects of Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria. Biden is putting the arsonist in charge of the fire brigade. All other ICJ rulings stump and deny the internal net benefit as well as making Russian and Chinese involvement inevitable. Condo's a voting issue because it overloads the tracing, encourages in chasing and lazy advocacy. Dispose solves their offense. Judge Shake also bad because it splits the 2AR and makes the night block too easy. No impact ICJ credit posture 4 at one time scars when the ICJ decline the visible in the division of the ICJ jurisdiction. In that cases, the ICJ decline because the states could not trust judges by the law and partially could not please NATO powers, which would not allow themselves to be defied. Politics of the politics DA. Fiat solves the link as a durable good faith implementation explained above. Not intrinsic logical policymaker could do both, and the plan is the bottom of the docket because infrastructure would pass first. A cross-ex thing is telling they have to have a card saying what agent we are and proving that would link to politics. Otherwise, the phrase federal government shields the link. The plan is popular. Crandall 14. The Bush policy became unpopular, caused serious long-lasting problems. So unpopular, he found himself compared to Hillary. No bill takes months, thumpers, and water down. February 2024, there aren't enough votes passed. Mammoth infrastructure. Biden gets some maybe half complicated by a killing, social jumpstart to ban assault rifles and background checks and crisis at border, which defies spending will be left for boring limited division. Politician progressives want to be conservatives opposed to taxes. Both see risk in spending too much. The massive spending and taxes are non-starter for Republicans and Democrats, but will get watered down. Final outcome is unclear. Biden get a sling, but not all there will be leaks and deal cutting. Uncertainty for months, still bill comes into focus late summer. Inefficiencies, any benefits within 324 Biden structure will fail because it ignores inefficiencies that reduce benefits and spending that will divert it from his correct destination. By the time it reaches destination, it will last improvements, inefficient pricing, inflated cost misallocation of revenues, and solicitation attack by American requirements, creating environmental regulations, greatly extend the time to complete highway projects. No warming solvency. U.S. is only 15% of global emissions, and structural caps ensure failure. 1 domestically tossed so in 20 Biden pledged net zero reduction would be avoid 1.1 Celsius. Not enough, and Biden will say exception Republicans. The appeals will be resolved by conservative core Biscombe amendments by the U.S. and China will be 2.3 Celsius well above Paris. 2 internationally SOX lapse 20 years no binding requirement to achieve goals and thankfully economic nature makes Paris 5 important defections allows pledges solely on convenience expected NDTs are insufficient emissions gap was obvious the optimistic vision overall spell depends on actual action distance the unnecessary not sufficient the reason why aggression whether peer pressure can consistently work over decades especially through political and economic upheavals domestic interests will undoubtedly weigh as much or more than international reputation issues compartmentalized Stoko's 324 immigration giver from infrastructure Biden ability to stay focused and COVID through counter transition and impeaching of optimism the isolated distractions assessment of their discipline they'll stay on the main highway with the infrastructure bug on top of the surge and managed appropriately Buttigieg will push mine 320 bridges versus all Biden infrastructure plan to Congress plus delivery of consulting he simply was running the Department of Conversations with lawmakers no impact of climate Carol 19 there's no basis to suggest climate breakdown will mean human extinction reactions are extreme events are difficult to make and very greatly different models headlines claims that stems on effects capacity to model from a scientific perspective like it is personal speculation remains rather than a conclusion drawn from rigorous assessment and evidence the Poland DA were already building a base in Poland that thumps allies and we also have presence there now allies need reassurance Russian preemption scares and improves case solves the impact Poland would ask for other reassurances they don't want to antagonize Russia and benefit from COVID relief or diplomatic carrots the plan's clarification is assuring Williamson 16 the questions were immediately raised over the invoking Article 5 advising U.S. and Europe into how terrorism should be classified Europeans of myself having no opportunity for debate over whether Article 5 should be invoked native members express concern of the president that they would be able to scrutinize provisions of Article 5 no evidence as Biden will do it just says that he could it's contemplating a hypothetical that is also true for their card that says it will be deployed in Poland that card is trashed we can deploy anywhere else Germany Western Balkans Balkans etc their deterrence data in the case page proves Baltic to be a logical place to do it past decade of troop exercises in NATO 2020 and I'll just prove the impact case also solves it because it wouldn't go nuclear European fears and assurance is low now he's 21 European leaders know Biden's powers are limited where Trump isn't brains alive let's talk about the results from divided Congress and already yet stolen Biden expectations of China Russian trade setting the bar too low boil pay commitments and disguise bubbling tensions officials know tough conversations can't be avoided Europe is afraid to go its own way the U.S. had a course for strategic autonomy the independent approach to China Russia relations digital policy digital regulations taxes on a joint defense Europeans also worry that new Republican administrations may junk Biden's defense commitments back to the politics DA Pelosi and Schumer shield Swinger and Weaver 324 infrastructure plan would fall short getting Democrats on the same page is going to be an enormous task for Pelosi and Schumer.
Okay, gonna start 3 for prep and I'll ask questions in a bit.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, let's talk about the Carpenter card that you read says that Russia's weak. They're focused on domestic issues. What is the scenario for escalation if they have no intention to expand?
Fear of a NATO preventative intervention or strike.
Why does that mean they'll lash out if your card says they're focusing on domestic?
Because the regime is threatened. The only scenario they would attack is if they are provoked.
Well, like your evidence says that it's difficult for Russia to execute anything. So why would it escalate?
It's difficult for them to escalate expansion. They obviously have nukes. Our evidence says they're shifting to preventative posture. If they think NATO will act first, they will strike first.
Okay. Your Benson card on alliance commitments, what AFs does this limit out?
Ones that lack a pledge to the alliance. So if there wasn't a commitment borne out either in the treaty or to the ally bilaterally, those AFs would not be topical. But just for what it's worth, like we obviously meet your interpretation, right? Like you realize the plan limits the Article 5.
I'm asking about your counter interpretation, not your we meet argument.
Yeah,
evidence is just about clarifying different commitments. How does that not exploit the topic if it can allow clarification?
I just answered your question as well. And also the Hasselman card defines alliance commitments. The above one is more of a we meet card. There's 2 components to it. One is that any AF that restricts alliance commitments either needs to be restricting the treaty pledge or the promise to the ally, hence our hold de jure de facto apparent. And also there's the second half of the res. They have to limit defense pact activations. You'd always be able to go for T against AFs that don't do that.
Okay. Your Crandall evidence on politics is just about general foreign policy. What piece of evidence do you have that says NATO would be popular?
Well, it's in the context of the Bush Doctrine, which is the NATO condition for activations that we limit the preventative use of force.
Okay. Why does that? Okay. Why does the AF cite that doctrine?
Because Article 51 of the UN Charter is what authorizes force based on individual or collective self-defense. In fact, there are only 2 legal use justifications for force in this quo, and it's cited there.
The last question is your Williamson card is about how terrorism should be classified. What effect does the AF have upon that?
it would limit preventative wars to displace terrorist WMD. So NATO could not invoke Article 5 and say, we're invoking Article 5 to invade Iraq because we think that ACAP has nukes in the region.
Okay, sent. T alliance commitments, T activation, Russia advantage, imminence advantage, collective defense advantage.
Sorry, could I get that again?
I didn't hear you.
Could I get that again?
Yes, T alliance commitments, T Casus Fideris, Russia advantage, imminence advantage, collective defense advantage. I think microphone is working. Cool. Okay, I'm gonna start now.
Topical Labs have to introduce a formal and explicit alliance commitment that the U.S. has made in the text of a treaty. They don't. The act merely specifies against something that has been currently discussed that allows any team growing with alliances to be topical, opening the floodgates to hundreds of unpredictable apps to dodge the core controversy in the topic in the literature that allows apps that leverage the alliance for other random conditions like environmental monitoring, election reform, as well as apps that rule out any type of weapon from being used in a country's defense, ensuring the no nuclear first use, no cyber first use, any other tiny weapons class for all the topic countries, as well as hundreds more. That destroys the basis for negative preparation, undermining fairness, which is intrinsic good for debate, limits use to massive. It makes preparation impossible. There was independent precision impact at field 12 for well-defined alliances and formal informal relationship is identical with surrounded by Barnett and Levy. The problems that the bar definition of alliance may be so expensive to encompass any unimaginable security arrangement and states below the distinction between alliances and collective security arrangements above definitions embrace all of the manner of security cooperation. They say they're probabilistic. Alliance commitments are formal, written down specific promises to explicitly do something for alliances, allies in the event of an attack that requires topical apps to alter the actual commitments and promises in the alliance treaty, not just add conditions or clarify policy outside of it. That's moral commitments must be formal written down. Yarmelo 16. Alliance commitments are written pledges intended for security cooperation. True of all alliance commitments by definition leads to have alliances a formal agreement that alliance to turn common community coordinate action leaders time will form documents as the condition they are obligated to take leaders formalize their alliance commitment and written cooperative agreements. All alliances are by definition formed through written agreements through state leaders must be explicit. The indicator of alliance commitment through implicit statement about the alliance. Their first card was making the limit or reduced argument that it clarifies the commitment. It does not reduce the commitment in size, which is the Papa Chai evidence. They said that it reduces ambiguity. There's no legal commitment for the U.S. to engage in offensive operations, which is the best that their Schmidt evidence gets. Limit means remove a currently existing conditions group of 10. Limit connotes something taken from the current holder of city limits when it initially provides not when it continues use of the phrase is limited. The use suggests the association must be providing services before the protections apply. 2. Over limits allows any clarification on cyber or hybrid prevention on attribution, self-defense, and consider cyber Baltics and Kaku cyber add in the combinations which expose the topic. 3. There occurs defining alliances, not commitments, then defining probabilistic commitments. No wonder it concludes that way. Topically is an AF burden to prove they've not cited nor read from the text of the treaty that establishes the alliance that their AF is unless they affirmatively prove that they are a formal or explicit commitment in the text of the treaty. They cannot be T. Commitments requires there to be discrete, specific, and politically binding commitment. Current 16 commitments are defined as specific publicly expressed agreement and to state a limited promise. There are criteria, discrete, and specificity binding future orientation commitments supposed to be sufficiently precise or to be identifiable measurable outcomes such as peace or generally too vague to meet the standard commitments. Supposed to be politically binding action needs to include verbs that connote obligations, general statements, or aspirations are included. Reject colloquial definitions into precise and legally meaningful terms. Spencer 13 major countries are simply not willing to accept the commitments, which is a precise legally binding meaning. Their argument will just be that the U.S. is vaguely alluded to defense or said something in informal documents that doesn't count unless the commitment is clear as to exactly what we'll say or do, not a real commitment. Malware 59 is difficulty facing all lines to reading a clear document. Citizens that members will act according to their constitutional processes. This means something is not a real commitment. Who can say in advance the constitutional processes of the country is going to be if the plan is not changed? A binding commitment on part of the U.S. is not reduced one. Spare 8, a commitment is not binding if it is not a commitment in the first place. They said, de jure 1, it's a master's thesis. 2, all of the cards above. Answer 3, it absolutely unlimits the topic. They could justify any app for Article 5 is beyond the scope of the current treaty because it could be a possibility that could mean dialogue and cooperation with any country in the world to counter terrorism. The NATO Russia Council, Iran denuclearization, burden sharing, defensive investment, Afghanistan mission, NPT, arms control, support for democracy in Moldova, support for the UN and transatlantic relations, hotlines with Russia, improving military mobility, institution building in Libya, conventional arms control, Mediterranean dialogue with Jordan, etc. They said definition of reduce, that was above. Reduce is modified by the prepositional phrase by limiting, which is a present participle, so it must immediately take effect and have instant impact. Illogical, unpredictable, precluding a future increase is not reduction or evidence assumes typical application. Harmon 12, each argues kind of reduce the salary introduced to support the claim is not eligible for the salary increases. Each argues that the court unnaturally with the term reduced to mean not increased rather than according to the plain meaning of the court does not agree. They say that can is possibility. The phrase can be activated does not mean the advocates to reduce the commitments to NATO in the event of alien invasion or other undefined security circumstances, which proves their limits argument. Their argument presumes defense pacts themselves are meaningless. It's a non-starter. The phrase can be activated as beholden to conditions under which that language narrows the topic to active obligations, all of which are confined to defense pact. Here 77, the clause under which suggests the formal documents or confine the operations under which is clear and ambiguous. The plan is set up. The phrase can be activated as specifies current ability. Their interpretation moves the id suffix, which limits that which can be by attaching the phrase to the defense pact word info no date expressing the ability can be done depending on the word to which is attached. Such a which can be add. Can as a modal verb means ability to do something. Topic presumes those conditions under which have the ability to activate defense pacts. Their interpretation moves the phrase under which reading the resolution is substantially limited. The conditions that can activate the defense pact. Rule in 18 can along with could belongs to a class of verbs that called modal auxiliaries. They belong to something with other verbs. They said the is possibility. They didn't read a definition in all the cards above prove that it cannot be possibility. Our interpretation does not justify all Baltics AF because that commitment is firm in the text of the NATO treaty, whereas theirs is not, and they've not even attempted to say that in the TUEC. AF ground does not come first, and we do not overlimit our interpretation. Lacks in plenty of core AFs with tons of literature. Advanced ground solvency mechanisms. NHI topic proves that debates over limited resolution are innovative. Our interpretation gives a negative chance to feel 12 even when the focus is limited. There are never possible important issues to explore who aligns with whom, which alliance policies to determine how work and share disputes honor the commitments to alliance make war more likely to alliance through to alliance to bulge alliance to deter the prospects of victory. There are far too many questions to explore throughout the book. 2, the point of the topic is to engage in focused debates over alliance commitments, allowing AFs to don't modify core commitments of the treaty, lets them dodge the specific controversy that the community publishes the topic to vote for. 3, limits the outweighs if innovation and learning things about things like their AF is good, neg structural inability on a wide topic. It means that they can't outweigh functional limits suck under their model. 1, we do not get a quality assurance and deterrence Ds because there's not a firm commitment to the remaining functional limits. Produce bad debates, cardless console, artificial debates. Reasonability, 8, they are not that. B, forces judgment dimension, recourse to meaning interpretations. It's the only objective framework. The other T argument. Other, I've read definitions of limit and reduce, which all answer this. Defense pacts are agreements that obligate one state to come to the defense of the other, but only in the event of the attack, which is the melon evidence. For those to be limits on defense pact, they must be specifically enumerated. Shiva 15, variable measures when the defense pact limits the conditions of which defense obligations are invoked. The line specify the defense obligations which are only invoked if a member is attacked by a specific adversary in specific location without provocation. The variable takes the value of 1 with the line specifies the limits the conditions under which the obligation are invoked. The value of 0 for Leon does not specify any other limits. Our grand argument was answered above. Counter interpretation only your AF is arbitrary justifies any interpretation of any different AF, which makes literally any AF on the topic key. Advantage 1. Internal link is about NATO being strong against Russia. No hard says that the plan presents united front. Quite the contrary. No Russia war. Putin knows where the line is. He won't cross it because he's not suicidal. That's why they've invested billions into lengthening the escalation ladder. Military agreements. Text 20. Nonsense to keep middle crisis risk of competition. Mid as high motives and when I have expressed some doubts about opposition. What is to keep the U.S. and Russia from traveling into the anthalized bilateral multilateral agreements specifically designed to keep the incidents escalated to where there are at least half tons of bilateral agreements, military incidents, NATO members that are similar. And there's no new Russia nuclear doctrine, not a concern. Superficial. Chibok 20. Putin's new policy decrees and actually doesn't signal change nuclear posture. Either the U.S. or Russia officials say the statement aligned with the U.S. fusion of the Russian nuclear process and NDT and NPR. 0 impact. Hypersonic Star 20. Hypersonic missiles not terrifying. The avant-garde hypersonic entered the surface on 27 December. This would be alarming if the traditional ICBM had suddenly become vulnerable. There are no effective defense against fast ICBMs. Anti-ballistic missiles can outside the hundreds of ICBMs that would launch the anti-defense missile easy to overwhelm by sheer numbers. The old ICBMs we still get through. The cool new weapons look powerful. The people who don't understand deterrence to few weapons not see strategic realities doubling on use and no strategic long as stalemate will not be disabled by a film flashing new gadget like hypersonic missiles. Advantage 2. U.S. could obviously do it unilaterally, which is why all of their evidence Thomas is discussing the Bush Doctrine and has nothing to do with NATO. Plaintiffs and stop use intervention. Schmidt 19 fears of a strict reading of the barring response to be replaced. The allies remain of response to collective defense outside NATO would be forcefully respond to be stabilized. One of the key lessons of World War II. The collective defense require the NEC, U.S. remain free to exercise individual self-defense irrespective of action or inaction. This includes the defense of the alliance and states outside of the NATO framework, low-walk, redundant, irrelevant, clause 09, explosive growth of ILO, including the proliferation of organizations and courts, as well as development of new fields and environmental human rights law relegated the law to wars of exerting no terror. Mueller 21, the exaggeration of terrorist capabilities and the ability to develop nukes, given the limited capability of terrorist concerns seem to override the group's inhibit a limit desire even less progress in going atomic. They discover the tremendous efforts likely seriously like to be successful. Advantage 3, obviously all of the arguments about how the U.S. could do it unilaterally apply here. U.S.-led international law fails. Fuller 322, Washington certainly make other countries that and deciding the American vision of democracy is determining U.S. policy. America's 20. Consider the Iraqis, Syrian, Somali, Libyan, Iranian, Afghan, and Pakistani collateral damage and endless U.S. intervention, assassinations of Soleimani, Washington, except Israel, Saudi Arabian capitalism, includes color revolution, allowed the sea right to the child CIL. We'd used cite CIL or Article 51, Schmidt 19. That was actually marked in the Winnancy framework, so I'm going to finish that. Pursuant to Article 51 of UN Charter, CIL UN obligations enjoy primacy over other treaties, including N18, Indo-Africa War, Iraq 16 War in Africa has declined dramatically. Outside actors reinforce positive trends, towards peace for using various data. After 2000, conflict intensity fell by half. The WHO shows 95% decline in conflict deaths, armed conflict lower than any time. U.S. Europe China have become more active in diplomacy, assistance, and peacekeeping, pressing to end fighting rather than choosing side. The world has become less likely to fuel conflict. Growth has and governance, political participation made safe flows and governance less likely. Political security and economic improvements are reinforcing each other. Africa work through another AO to resolve conflicts. Gonna read another no Russia card. Numerous other constraints. For 19, highly unlikely that Russia is preparing to initiate a war since its security goals and strategy paths to develop key capabilities and constraints posed by the economy, democracy, and personal policy. Air neg. People overestimate what whole handle 19 has become a comment to talk about new Cold War. The way of thinking is dangerous. We need to correct a way with how we think about Russia's avoiding the prevailing mentality that part insufficient struggle with the Kremlin never return from us than anything like the global invasion of Soviet Union events and no can suffer. Worldwide constantly, we are always working with Russia on key global security concerns who, like the contemporary environment of the Cold War, forgot how dangerous the latter really was.
Are you ready for questions?
Yeah.
Okay. Is the hybrid warfare AF topical?
No.
Okay. The Baltics AF though is?
Mm-hmm.
So could you point me to the line in the treaty where Baltics is stated?
It says like all member states, and the Baltics were expanded to in 2004.
But what card says that the Baltics are in the Atlantic area? Is enlargement topical?
Member states. We expanded to the Baltics in 2004, making them a member state.
Okay.
So we've done that.
Gotcha. What evidence have you read that defines armed attack?
I think that the Winnancy evidence on the other thing that I extended, like about defense pacts, would answer arguments that might be like important. But
okay. So you told me earlier that hybrid warfare was not topical. We have a commitment to defend from armed attack. What card says that hybrid warfare is not an armed attack?
Like we're not debating the hybrid war AF, so we haven't read a card.
Well, I'm asking about the logical implications of your topicality interpretation. You committed to excluding an affirmative. Explain how you exclude it.
Because it is not in the text of the treaty, and we've read plenty of definitions that
say
that
armed attack is. Just like the Baltics case, it says member states, not Baltics, but the Baltics are part of a member state.
Like, I think you're mixing up that like the floor is our first T argument, and like we've made another T argument that like goes a little bit higher than that.
Okay. Are AFs that limit activation upon armed attack topical?
AFs that explain.
So if the affirmative says, here is an armed attack, if it occurs, you may not activate the defense pact. Is that class of AF topical?
If it's like a response, generally, but it kind of depends what the form of attack is. If it would be.
You have not defined armed attack, yes?
NFU is not T, but like it depends what the type of attack is, and if it's in response.
My question did not pertain no first use; it pertained to armed attack, which you have not defined. That's fine. Okay. You listed nuclear first use and cyber first use as topical cases. Can you explain how these would beat the Article 5 pick?
Because you could say that like doing it within NATO is important. That all
the flexible response counterplan can do it within NATO without touching Article 5.
I didn't hear the last part because I was trying to answer.
A flexible response counterplan can do it within NATO without touching Article 5?
Well, it's like still a commitment to other allies, so it would probably link to the net benefit.
So links to the net benefit is the only AF response to the Article 5 pick. Okay.
Like the neg are, like
you said there was an independent precision impact. Does precision outweigh limits?
No.
Okay, so you think limits outweighs precision?
Yeah.
Does predictability outweigh limits?
I think it's hard to separate the two, but a more limited topic for the neg
So-
is the most important thing.
Are we in agreement that limits ought to be predictable?
Sure.
Okay, sounds good. That's all I have.
It's been set. It's politics, advantage counter plan, ICJ, pull and DA.
Say one more time, please. Order one more time, please.
Is everyone here? Everyone good? Oh, yeah.
Order.
Politics, DA,
Again, yeah.
advantage counter plan, ICJ, Poland. Is everyone good now? Okay.
Politics, you concede no impact, not going forward, no offense, advantage counterplan, concede the permits, justice has a competition, secret counterplans are reason to reject the argument, not the team, ICJ, concede the permutation, justice has a competition, conditionality is good, it's a new app, we get to do whatever we want, prefer first Netflix, can you test the app from multiple angles, different options, offset, F choice into our bias, second argument, innovation force best sides to do more research and prevents risk aversions, improves UAC efficiency and strategy with solves or often fewer additional options, team rely on generics and have sale debates, reduce our level, dissads, Jones, we different rebuttal, solve death, our interpretation is we do what we did, even though they're arbitrary non-voting issue causes substance crowd out. The point of being nag is to make it hard for the F. Judge kick is the reason to reject the argument off the team. The Poland DA. Biden's currently reviewing Polish NATO troop deployments, but is resisting increasing permanent troop and base presence. The F forces him to reassure NATO, which results in horse training and spending presence to Poland. They're the highest priority. Perception of Polish troop deployment immediately triggers Russian venturism and escalation in Central and Eastern Europe, which spills out and causes NATO-Russia war. Maintaining deployments and focus now on Asia is critical to maintaining dominance against China. Rapid 20 U.S. announcement must start by rebalancing responsibilities. The U.S. will need to reorganize the security expansion. Now, Baltic states are in NATO. Washington will guide defensive military pressure on nations for more German parents have no chance of countering China's growing power without American assistance. Asia must be U.S. primary military theory without Europe. Second, the U.S. spending and presence should reflect those priorities more. Spent to deter China more deployments. The loss of deterrence capability causes China war brands 20 China war conflict occur when one party decides a war that is preferable. That could happen all too easily. All the balance of power shifts that Beijing might gamble that the U.S. way. Stay out of war, what is critical, maintaining military balance of power and the perception of U.S. command that makes it less likely Chinese leaders go to match a war going their way. It requires strengthening U.S. alliances. So America shouldn't feel themselves thinking that just managing courts and mitigating misperception offer a way to preserve peace. It turns advantage one emboldens Russia much more quicker than the Afghan access their internal link. It turns advantage two causes allied entrapment, Russian aggression, splits NATO confident. 18 Poland's lobbying for a permanent base at Pentagon, seriously stunning it would lead to a security dilemma. Political support Poland's worrisome liberal term, keeping the bulk of U.S. firepower off of Russian borders that allows Washington independent military courts to burn effectively single increasing immediate deterrence and response buys valuable time for both sides to avoid miscalculating, losing the opportunity to defuse the crisis peacefully. Flexible posture is a standard path. The Russian forces expect the U.S. to blunt their offensive with air power. Russian general staff will assume only possible rule for division and Poland to assault. Kaliningrad invade Belarus. The logical response of Russia press Belarus to host Russian bases. We begin expensive and unnecessary security dilemma that these can and tragically countries will often take credit. Poland's request sends a terrible signal to Moscow that it is not confident in its Article 5 commitment bilateral proposal for U.S. based on Polish security by D, creating the credibility of new battle groups. So it's like the air out of Polish growth and defense, spending granting Poland a permanent base. So it also opened the door and seizing demands for U.S. person support demands will never providing too much security can lead to entrapment for the U.S. and greater risk taking to part of allies turns advantage for theory. It creates a precedent for resolving territorial conflicts. Trend 18 on Moscow should attract pro-Russian to the Federation actively. Donbass of pro-Russian element leave Ukraine. Donbass will revert to Ukraine. Solve these the negotiation become important precedent for becoming a conflict and reducing such a model for co-op. The threshold should be high for all of the 2AC's arguments that are not carded. They're all blippy. None of them are carded. Reject that model of argumentation proliferation with zero warrants. We got new answers. Basing now does not thump our evidence from this month says that Polish troop deployments at the top of the docket for Biden NATO negotiations. Existing bases obviously is priced into our evidence. Our internal links about troop redeployments being recommitted, not just facing Biden's assessing troop placements now. First news, 26 review of U.S. forces. Raw will be conducted with the participation of allies. Means that Poland will take a part in announcing the decision concerning the relocation of the source of data percent. We are in favor of maintaining even increasing the American military presence in Europe. Biden doesn't have momentum for a big Eastern redeployment now. Much on the 20. You could put U.S. troops in the Baltic states. Feels like rushing Russia's nose in a way I'm not sure Biden wants to do at the beginning of this admin. Added presence in Eastern Europe is probably going to be modest defense tendency to maintain continuity. Community lead Biden to modify the term doctrine. No Polish bases now. Elite 6 out of 10 of Poland's proposal. Placing a permanent presence as with Poland wants them close to Belarus. This term to antagonize Russia. Washington way prefer to deploy them further west. Biden will be forced to reassure post with troops to NATO allies. Those troops and bases would go to Poland if that would happen. That's blank shipping gore. Even if Poland likes the plan, they'll use it as leverage to benefit Chambers. 12 Poland position as a staunch ally of the U.S. in negotiation over BMD. Poland popular deployment to extract security benefits. Poland secured a declaration of strategic cooperation, incorporated Patriot missile air defense, plus U.S. system modernization, allow for a redeployment of U.S. aircraft on a rotational basis. Poland has been exerting self-in relations with announced withdrawal from Afghanistan against the U.S., which should also being more assertive. Libya, Poland is determined to carve out benefits for itself. The plan is not reassuring. Their evidence is not about the AF. It doesn't solve our internal link, even if it's about reassuring our evidence says that allies would still demand it still wants off Polish fears abandonment. Mueller 18 notion that Warsaw's security concerns can be satisfied if the U.S. deployed more commentary by suggestion Polish fears of abandonment can be overcome. Even entire U.S. armed division probably won't be enough to convince Eastern Europe that the United States is committed and Poland's trying to solve a problem that cannot be solved with geography, Poland and borders. Russia, Biden empirically reassures Poland and Libya. 9 after the decision to cancel most of the defense plans in Poland, the U.S. needed to do more than damage control to seize Biden's trip to Eastern Europe. Provides the opportunity to reassure Poland that the U.S. is committed to their security. This reassurance is needed, especially in the wake of decision to cancel most of the defense in Poland. Although decision to grab plan was right from strategic view, the public rollout was less than an ideal Polish were informed at the last second, making them feel like discernible plots and broad strategic game rather than valid allies to contribute Mr. Sort of move was to placate Russia. This perception has also been nevertheless damage to the U.S. relationship with the region. The key relationship Biden need to do more than just repair the damage. Yes, he would redeploy. That's a blank sheet of evidence. Russia deterrence arguments don't disprove our internal link. The case it's not solid. The plan is not reassuring, which is above their uniqueness. Evidence is not about Poland, which is the threshold for our internal link. The link controls the direction of uniqueness. The plan's a massive reduction that would demand reassurances, even if allies receive abandonment. Our evidence says that Biden would want to recommit, and Poland would obviously accept it. Biden resets then later 20 Biden accepted to kill the plan to withdraw. That would reset the NATO alliance. Biden administration will reset and revive relations with NATO. Trump's way cause more to implement. But Biden will likely return to traditional U.S. approach of strong arms to our allies in private and avoid public criticism.
749. Okay, I will send the document. Give me a sec to do math so I can put the prep in the chat. Okay, the 1AR is sent. Oh, and Geo, mute on Discord, please.
Okay. Let me know when you all have a doc and are ready for the order. Actually, is anyone not ready for an order? Okay. Russia advantage. Imminence advantage. Collective defense advantage. Topicality. I'm doing all the TIFOs on one page. And then Poland. Is anyone not good? Okay, sweet. The advantage is not about a strong narrow, it's about deterring Russian preemption. Yes, Russian war preventive posture spurs Russian ships preemption cause immediate war through launch on warning and escalate their defense doesn't apply. The suicide argument goes after you will perceive as life on the line. Our scenario circumvents traditional fire breaks and results in low-level deployment of tactical weapons. Russians, generals, politicians, 3D thinkers agree shift to preemption is in which answers there no new Russia doctrine argument. No, not going for the hypersonic impact, but they've conceded a cyber attack, electronic war via space cause extinction. Only U.S. Russian war cause extinction, which was also conceded. No new cards answer that, which means that it only has enough arsenal size to obliterate the entire Earth. Other constraints arguments are irrelevant and presume Russian internal stability. Don't err negative. You are biased against extinction risk. We have backed by science and 0.30% of risk is still a high risk. The imminence advantage, no unilateral all cause for reasons. One citation solves the plan legally invokes Article 51 of the UN Charter, durably binding the United States to interpretation law. Second is armed attack. The plan also interprets the meaning of armed attack, which governs both collective and individual defense. Third, they've dropped durable fiat. We get good faith implementation enforcement over the plan. That means Biden abides by its legal standard. For legitimacy, the U.S. will initiate a unilateral operation without allied support. The plan does stop U.S. intervention. The precedent enables restraining and applies true limitations for activation of restricted defense and preemption rather than prevention and requires UN Security Council approval. The law is not irrelevant. Solvency approves the plan creates compliance. They've dropped that enables governors of autonomous weapons. They've also conceded that it stops U.S. precedent. It causes Indian and Pakistan strikes that blow up the entire world. Nuke terror not going for it. Also conceded UN legitimacy. Multilateral solves entire six and relevant risks. ILA stuff. ILA doesn't fail. There are the collective defense advantage. ILA doesn't fail. There are reputational costs and ensure compliance. Countries get shunned and locked out financial agreements causing compliance. ECL argument. We cite United Nations Article 5 and interpret it to preventive action. So it's forbidden superseding. That superseding argument proves our solvency. Africa war not going for it. They've conceded Russia, China, and our war in the Middle East, which also obliterates the entire D. The topicality page. We meet the plan limits and explicit Article 5 commit to activate when armed attack occurs. Any other standard has been addressed by the UN and every international court. Killing and 13 when affirmative and static law is rolled. There is no reason to assume that political regime no longer allows it to towards self-defense because war is required. Then stating Article 51 of the United States Charter because when it's first states armed attack occurs, will have assistance self-defense since the word defining those light on what constitutes attack or when it can be occurred if one armed attack occurs when first forcefully cast as soon as an international boundary occurs. International boundary there would be no scope for anticipated self-defense. This is not the most convincing interpretation of occurrence. The charter was adopted. Armed attack includes operations even the intentional armed attack occurred at the time. It was evidence to an attack was going on to take place before any forces crossed the frontier that anticipated from the Caroline actor within the last window was a feasible window. No international court or the council never ruled out anticipatory self-defense. There is ample evidence self-defense containing anticipatory element at the time the charter was adopted and that continues to now in the absence of conclusive evidence. There's no reason to assume ASSD has become unlawful. We meet their interpretation. The alliance commitment. The plan reduces as a treaty commitment to evoke the defense back on upon armed attack. We clarify when states may act and require them to wait until after the attack. We meet is yes no question. The burden is on the negative to read a card that says Article 5 cannot be activated in anticipation of armed attack. RF is not offensive operations. Bad plan text to the vacuum. Plan fiats a reduction to alliance commitments. Any other standards arbitrary and regressing to negative and which goes class and fairness limits all their matter than counter-information only RF is topical. We meet both explicit and specific statements. Article 5 and armed attack are both stated provisions of the treaty. The following line is what we limit elephant aid. Any armed attack against one shall be an attack against all. If such an armed attack occurs, each of them will assist parties by taking such action it deems necessary. After the only implication of Article 5 in history was a preventative war. After line 11 counter-interpretation. One alliance commitments include a factor of apparent promises to allies we previously pledged to conduct preventative wars. That's the Austin House will drop their position. Decide no commitments or de jure because the U.S. doesn't consider itself bound by international law. law. Second, reduce to a certain extent. Third, candidate's possibility. Four, conditions must limit circumstances which the pact to be activated. Five, the only activation promises we have to NATO is the app. It's the case of an armed attack as defined by the UN Charter. Six, defense pacts there. Agreements that obligate prescribe response proves we meet commitment. Our offense at the top. One, logic. The treaty is intentionally vague and ambiguous. It says member states, but does not list the member states. It says armed attack without defining attacks that allows the negative to move the goal so as to selectively exclude affirmative skills clash. A second, half ground. Gray zone halves are good. They allow for innovative approaches to next generics in combat. The next slide, bias topic. Third, arbitrariness. They haven't defined armed attack. It's imprecise and unpredictable. The terms are often regressive. Their interpretation. They break the topic from sensitivity. These categories de jure apparent and de facto by de jure convincing promises binding at law because there's no outstanding de jure commitment. A defensive in a nation whatsoever legally speaking, no signatory is bound by. We find ourselves drawn into words not because of legal obligations, but inside of our obligations. Half ground outweighs net ground. It starts to bane is key to a clash. Net ground is high now because of quality generics. There, Delphi evidence that is assume how they define the topic. Overliming is not good because it kills resource clash and fairness. And HI does not disprove the quality of net ground was lower. Topicality is a neck burden. Anything else causes endless substance. Try to limit means to set bounds. The FACA 52 defines limit us to set bound is discontinue as to terminate was not intent that landlords have the right to discontinue to stop sale. The right to limit by discontinue will not be made. That will not be made. Our interpretation is the gold standard for precision. Part of 19 at artifact for NATO conditions of activation triggered by an armed attack. Activation triggered by an armed attack. Territorial scopes covered NATO allies, territories, and forces. Their curse card defines instrument not under which their Berlin word card information cards proves our point. We limit a possibility case of defense pact activation. No limits or ground loss or concentration excludes our case list because the apps they listed like Holland's nuclear do not respond to armed attacks. Condition apps must be excluded by defining reduce as permanent. Affirmatives must meet the second half of the resolution. So apps that reduce and commit aren't topical. Functional image attacks. No app would have a defense of the Article 5 pick. Flexible response to insurance, dip cap, politics, etc. The Poland dissad at the top. If we win thump, there's link turns and insurance load. Then the entire overview insurance case is relevant. Russia is not worried about troop deployment. They're worried about NATO preemptive strikes because that's the only thing that threatens regime survival. The China stuff, they don't have a card that says there's a trade-off. We turn the China impact because they've conceded a China war on the advantage, which means we access it. Russia's not worried about troop deployment. They're worried about NATO preemptive via strikes. No turns case. We have multiple case impacts that are no explanation for turns case. It doesn't embolden Russia. That was answered by they've conceded past decades of troop exercises. And NATO 2030 disprove the impact. No entrapment of scenarios about Russian offensive use. Article 5 is not automatically armed force for any presence happen after their card thumbs. No territory conflict turn. Our evidence says international law is the interlinked precedent. Don't reject analytics. They're good for debate. Their answer to the Poland basis now arguments aren't good. Even if we are thinking about new deployments, we have some bases previously, which obviously should have trumped the entirety of the link. The link, Poland won't use the plan as leverage. Poland will know that the U.S. would say no since there are no legitimate assurance risk as they like the plan. They also makes it inevitable because either Poland wants the basis or they won't. The link turn outweighs the link. Only we have evidence specific to the AF mechanism entirely. No link at thumb page 19. Fighters around Article 5. The relationship is less special than one might think because European people have to war is dubious to one only 1/5 word in the action full for Article 5. Chronic failure lend wholeness to Article 5. Trumps against my enforces have an it'll decade-old condition. Market can decade-old condition. European fears are inevitable. They disagree on key priorities and think the GOP will already reverse commitments, which means assurance is tube now. No redeployment. They have no card that says we would need to redeploy deployment. They can see that Germany, Western Baltics, etc. And obviously the case outweighs because they have multiple impacts that are conceded and there's no counterpoint to solve them. So it's over.
I'm just sending out one card. Okay, that's it. Do I look like I'm working? I'm just gonna close some things. So I'm gonna close some things so I don't lag. All right. Cool. T. All right, everyone is set. Cool.
I'm sorry, did you give an order?
Voting for coach and predictable. Nope. Raphael's not good.
I'm sorry, my bad. I just hadn't gotten an order.
Okay, T.
Yeah, I
You
gotcha.
couldn't tell. All right, I'm gonna start again. Voting for a coach and predictable and fairly limited topic that ensures discussion of the core controversies of alliance commitments. Our interpretation of alliance commitments is formal and explicit in the text of a treaty. Lets the neg envision absence sorting at the formation a key function of the alliance, the treaty, and then the neg can have core links to the positions that we imagine when putting together this topic and starting our research over the summer. Under their model, there could be an infinite amount of topical apps across all 4 topic alliances. The topical apps could rule out any type of weapon in response to defending a country in any diplomatic forum. They could use conditions on the alliance to artificially get advantages about election reform, environmental monitoring. All NFU apps are T, as are no. All cyber and first use apps, the infinite permutation of cyber apps, and somewhat limit response to any certain kind of attack from any country. This unpredictable hodgepodge of certain hundreds of apps turns clash, which is the basis of debate. The only pedagogical benefit we get from the activities and in-depth discussion of core controversies and back and forth responses in all debate is founded upon the idea of response born out of effective preparation. If the neg cannot reasonably prepare for all of these apps, vote neg. It is better to limit out a few more apps than allow any app tomorrow to live out a vague commitment that the U.S. has alluded to. Similarly, the DA links to the air interpretation leaves the neg with are few and far between. Reducing a barely there unofficial commitment isn't the core purpose of the alliance. So D is about assurance, deterrence, etc. do not make much sense because they rely on changing a key part of the alliance. Then the perception of that alteration to the alliance, and very few people write about changing some small part of a NATO hybrid policy or uncertain activation because it's not even an official term. Leaving the neg without core position significantly lowers debate's quality by forcing the neg to go for process counter plans and away from literature. What is the neg supposed to say to an AF about a potential commitment that is hypothetically discussed about some maybe existing for the U.S. to possibly respond preemptively armed attack? They said we meet. That is, their court is not about Article 5. The best that their 1AC evidence gets is they pointed in 1AC to the Schmidt evidence, which says that beyond the material scope of self-defense lies uncertainty. This is a long-standing point of contention in international law about whether Article 5 can be invoked, may be invoked not anticipatorily. The Yost evidence says that the anticipatory use of force remains controversial and is tied to debates about whether it is legal and morally legitimate. Article 51 does not get them that far. No court is even talking about Article 5 in that context. They're evidence is saying if an armed attack occurred, then there would be a traditional understanding, and then concludes there is a debate, which obviously links to all of our offense. They've conceded a lot of our definitions of alliance commitments that they need to be are written in explicit pledges to formalize cooperation signed by leaders in a formal document specifying conditions that are obligated to take, which is true of all alliances by definition. They need to be discrete, they need to be specific, and they need to be binding, which their interpretation definitely does not meet, and they need to be sufficiently specific and precise enough to be identifiable and measurable. Only our interpretation uses preciseness and legal meanings, which means that we solve a lot of their predictability offense, and a clear document exactly saying what we'll do is the only way to meet our interpretation, because they have zero evidence that Article 51 is binding, so it's not a commitment in the first place, which is our Sparrow evidence. They said that the plan reduces armed attack. I'm going to read this card below, but I'm only reading it because then the 2AC, they did not make it explicit. We made arguments citing armed attack. The threat of armed attack is not enough. Line 17, each party recognized armed attack would be dangerous. It declares it would be enough to meet a common danger. That is the key provision of the treaty, which lays out the Casa Spadaris article, removing actual attack treaties. Parties not merely imminent threat of attack. The term armed attack is not trigger events leading nuclear strikes, but to read not tell us how we react, especially in the broad sense, not meaning that common danger. They said that Article 5 cannot be activated. That is not the only thing that their interpretation allows. Plain text in a vacuum is a terrible interpretation. That means that you could shoehorn words into some no meaning word plan that would then supposedly be topical, even if none of it made grammatically sense. Counter our interpretation. Ditto terrible standard arbitrary. Lets any AF be topical. Avalon card neg says that if an attack occurs, it will then respond, and it is not talking in the context of the AF. T is an AF burden, which is a conceded argument. They need to produce a card that says that the AF is an alliance commitment in the text of a treaty. They do not have sufficient defense to our limits DA, which should filter the debate. The Duffield Court says that alliance is understood as any unimaginable security arrangement, blurs the distinction between alliances and collective security arrangement, which turns a lot of their precision offense at a much more meaningful level, because the core controversy of the topic is alliance commitments, which is a fundamentally different orientation centered on an entirely different distinction. The key function of the alliance commitment is not exactly what we will do in response to a hybrid attack or potentially in response to anything else, but the thrust of Article 5 for one for all. They said preemptive versus 9/11. That was obviously in response because it was after 9/11 happened. Precision arguments answered above. They've conceded a lot of our reduced arguments. That is an independent thing that we can win on. Allowing clarification apps that aren't about real commitments massively expose the topic. They could establish any rule on cyber or hybrid, like proportionality, low, medium, high attribution standards, procedures on who gets to make the call, definitions of imminent attack, whether to allow preemptive attacks. Their interpretation allows for any area of the topic to be infinitely small. AF cyberspace, Arctic, ground campaigns limits are necessary and is more important than AF flexibility because the topic is already big enough. Our interpretation allows for apps to explicitly reverse the commitment, not merely applying the rules. Remove cyber from Article 5 for NATO. Withdraw our commitment to the Senkakus. Withdraw our commitment to the Baltics. Withdraw our commitment to defend the Scarborough Shoal in the Philippines. Theirs allows for any type of rule to be applied to any current commitment, where we allow for enough AF. They force us to look into every angle of self-defense law and every sub area of every treaty. A reduction in commitment is not what the AF is. It is a clarification. They just describe how some evaluation will go down. If a lawyer makes a commitment to an aspiring attorney who aims to be a partner and says, I will give you a raise if you do a good job, but I'll evaluate your work on some case-by-case basis, and then follows up with their email and says, here is how I will evaluate it. They've not reduced a commitment. They've clarified it. Clarifying how a commitment applies is not a reduction. The only commitment the U.S. has made is that it will respond exactly to what is in the text of the treaty, which they have conceded. They said the gray zone card, the gray zone apps are bad, which was all the stuff that they did above. The Fromkin evidence was explicitly answered in the 2NC because all of our evidence is that it has to be in the context of a treaty. Limit suggests association of existing services and conditions that are taken from the current holder. In the alliance context, that means a current commitment that already exists. Reduce precludes future activation. Can means that it must activate and express current ability, and limit the conditions, which means that it has to be obligations that are invoked, which requires attacks by specific adversaries. Precision argument was answered above, which is the same card. T is obviously an egg burden. Article 5 pick does not solve our offense because it requires specific evidence, and their interpretation leads to hackneyed debates that are terrible, that are not good for NDT Elam Day. The under which thing was answered above, and the Article 5 pick is terrible because the AF just needs one solvency deficit, and then the neg is hosed.
Okay, starting our prep. Okay, it's just T. Obviously, there are some cards I'm going to send out. May not read them, but I also might, and so that way everyone gets to have them in advance. Okay, they are sent. Okay. Wake, you all good? Just pan through the judges real quick. Okay, sweet. Let's get started. The affirmative meets their interpretation. The negative claim is that activation conditions must be written out in the treaty. There are two reasons why this is logically fallacious and impossible. One, the treaty itself does not specify conditions. It says member states, but does not list out each member. It says North Atlantic area, and yet does not define the exact geographic conditions. Second, they lack a definition of armed attack. This is the phrase in the treaty that governs both how and when the pact may invoke. The entire premise of NATO is once an armed attack occurs, i.e. the phrase armed attack occurs, NATO states are supposed to invoke the pact and have a response. They have not defined armed attack, so if we win, the plan limits the conditions upon activation response to armed attack that we unambiguously meet. By contrast, the F has multiple cards that establish that currently members may activate the pact in anticipation of armed attacks. The phrase in the treaty that we limit is the line, if an armed attack occurs that is a 1AR Avalon evidence. The plan requires NATO states to wait until after the attack occurs. That is an explicit change spelled out by NATO language instead of upon occurrence. Remember the two in our examples of AFs they allow. They said the Baltic, Scarborough Shoal, the Senkakus. Interesting. None of those are cited in the treaty. The Filipino NDT does not say Scarborough Shoal. It just says specific areas. Similarly, the Senkaku AF also does not say the Senkakus. It says areas under the administration of Japan. This all demonstrates their interpretation is excessively pedantic, and their we meet arguments are logically impossible to validate because the treaty language does not lay out every activation condition. It is totally illogical, grammatically imprecise, and impossible to read the resolution the way they are asking you to. You have to add more context and clarity to the treaty wording itself. Otherwise, it is impossible to assess a few global frames for how to evaluate your decision. One, we meet as a yes/no question. Drop one argument. A shred of affirmative leaning means that you automatically vote F because if we are 51% chance that we meet, that means we've met our burden. It also indicts their interpretation because the alternative is a moral hazard to always go for T, creating endless substance strata and turning the offense about why clash and fair debates matter. Second is topicality is a negative burden. This was not dropped in the 1AR. Assume the F is topical unless proven otherwise. There is a reason why F did not start with T contentions in the 1AC. Their argument presumes that even if the negative did not say T in the 1 and C, the F would then have to prove their T in the 2AC because it's an F burden. That is completely contradictory to basic reality. It means that unless their evidence definitively establishes that activation conditions cannot occur absent the plan, it proves we meet. Now I'm going to clear up a distinction between our interpretations at the top. We are going for we meet because we meet because the armed attack response is an explicit alliance commitment. They said commitments must be listed out in the treaty. The commitment to allow invocation in the event of armed attack is in the treaty. That is the commitment the plan limits. I'll go through each of our cards and there's to establish this. First is our 1AR kill evidence. This evidence indicates that the phrase if an armed attack occurs permits activation and imminence. Currently, NATO states, as unanimously declared by every international court as well as the UN Security Council, may activate the attack in imminence of armed attack, i.e. if they see troops mobilizing the last window of opportunity, if they expect a state has WMD or capabilities, they're permitted to invoke the pact because they foretell the armed attack occurring. The plan changes that promise. It says that treaty commitment is no longer applicable and no longer binding because now NATO states must wait until after the armed attack occurs. Second is a 1AR Avalon evidence, not a negative card. The line the affirmative limits is if such an armed attack occurs rather than the if that now changes to after an attack has occurred, which is an explicit change to the text of the treaty. The Fromkin evidence is effectively dropped in the 2NR. It says there are no de jure commitments because the U.S. does not consider itself bound by international law, so it is impossible to read the topic in their way. The only way to assess that we need is to look at the terms of the treaty, compare them to the plan, and then see if there's a modification that is sutured by the AF. The next card is our paired evidence. It cites Article 5 of NATO itself. I will read you the line. Conditions of activation triggered by an armed attack. Again, the negative is no evidence defining armed attack. Leon's evidence is their one prayer of winning. Not only is it a new argument that I'll address a bit below, but it also does not define armed attack, only the response that follows. Our paired evidence is explicit. It says the determination of when NATO states may invoke the pact comes after that triggering condition of an initial armed attack. Now, before anything else, plan text in a vacuum, the 2NR blew off way too quickly and just asserted it's a horrible model. That is not true. They've conceded our standard about sandbagging and arbitrariness. The plan text is not the basis for topicality, then what is? It opens the floodgates to the negative, choosing solvency advocates, tags, cross-ex phrases, anything else that can inform the scope of the plan that lets them move the goalposts endlessly and sandbag the affirmative, because they'll always interpret the AF in the least charitable way, ensuring that we're not topical and dooming any chance for the AF to ever meet their interpretation. Plan checks in a vacuum solves their offense. The AF is committed to topical wording. That means that picks, process, counterplans, assurance states, etc. all get better because the AF uses topic language in the plan text and adds additional clarification to modify that. That was also an argument made in the vagueness flow. In the 2AC, we have a clear DA to any other interpretation, so you have to assess the plan next to the res and the treaty. And if you think the plan text changes the meaning of either of those two, then we unambiguously meet their interpretation. Now, the reliance evidence is just describing the response that follows to armed attack and says that the threat is insufficient. This is a frame. This is wrong. It does not assume the imminent standard that I described above. Every international court, the UN Security Council, and the ICJ has rejected the standard of physical attacks having to occur. I'll read more evidence to substantiate this here because this is a new tuner argument. Article 5 itself allows it. 19 Article 5 allows for anticipatory defense. There's no distinction between inherent right and the treaty based on Article 51 in the absence of an inherent meant to limit application to attacks members that have fallen outside Article 5 scope. This cannot be. It seems clear Article 5 necessarily encompasses anticipatory defense. The SJ observed the right does not differ. The Article 5 can still include the right of anticipatory defense. The legal basis resides comfortably within the North Atlantic Treaty. Now, winning this we meet claim answers every argument they have advanced and answers reduce, limit, alliance commitments, etc. because we reduce a commitment that exists for allies. Now we've committed to defend them. If an attack occurs that changes post-plan, it is only after the attack has occurred, which is unambiguously a reduction. It reduces current commitments and it limits the current scope of the defense pact. So all the counterinterp stuff that was in the 1ER is irrelevant because our claim is we meet. This also answers all of their offense they do not want to hear about. That starts with standards revision of the topic. The negatives interpretation solely has to be compared to whether or not the affirmative meets its text. If we are a textually permissible reading, then we unambiguously meet their interpret. Anything else literally breaks topicality since it would be divorced from the facial reading of what we meeting means. Now they've made a few arguments that are relevant at the top. They said that you should err negative to limit out apps. This is not operationalized to we meet because their standards are irrelevant from whether or not the plan text is a permissible reading of them. Also, the examples they gave about hybrid policy or uncertain affirmatives proves how ludicrous their violation is because it relies on saying that you know what armed attack means in the treaty with absolute certainty. If there is any ambiguity, it demonstrates that the affirmative reduces the ambiguity of the commitment by at least clarifying it to not be total. It is totally unlimited now. We have no clue what it means at the most charitable reading of their interpretation, so there is only a risk that the affirmative is able to narrow it. Plus, all the arguments above are entire advantage to claim that invocations have already occurred and will occur preventively demonstrates that armed attacks and the promise to respond to them is an ongoing commitment that the plan unambiguously limits. Good debate.
Good debate.
Good debate. I'll send out a doc.
I just sent the app doc.
So we have Geo. Oh yeah, okay. One. Can I get a thumbs up just if everybody's here? I don't want to fuck this up. Okay. Michigan, Wake. One, two, three, four, five. Okay. Congratulations to both teams. Fantastic tournament. The decision is a 4-1 for the affirmative. So I said, so starting KM, I think you all are great. So I think Ruby, the first time I judged you was when you were in the Elams of Kentucky, and I think you were maybe the 32 seed, and you like gave He-Man like a real run for his money, like had him sweating the whole time. Decision took, the whole time. And since then, you've just been like a total force to be reckoned with. Like both of you been like the subject of hours of conversations at KU about your small F that nobody can beat, and you're like really, really tough. Neg strategies. You're just like awesome. Really, really fun to coach against you and judge you. Alex, the same thoughts. I only really knew you as Gidley's partner, but you turned out okay. And like your cyber stuff was great. AMARB at the end of all those cards, everyone knew how hard you worked all the time. And it's just like really just like inspiring to know that when y'all do it, y'all are doing it like on your own terms and really well. So I thought you went down swinging, and I thought despite it being 4-1, it was super close. So do you want to talk about the decision? Okay. So for me, the question is, do we have an obligation that's binding and in a treaty in the status quo to activate Article 5 in anticipation of an armed attack? The answer to that question is no. We can activate it, but we don't have a promise to. The status quo does give carte blanche for aggression, but does not promise anticipatory self-defense. And the NEG has demonstrated through AF readings that this legal interpretation is uncertain, it's ambiguous, it's up for dispute, it's controversial. And even on the most kind of generous read of all of the affirmative evidence, that's just about the legality of it, not the obligation to do it. And so you don't meet their inter. And like, I tried to ask Hegma about the counter-interpretation. He wouldn't help me at all. So I don't think there's a counter-interpretation. So you don't meet the only interpretation that's in the debate. Their interpretation is not good. It's potentially doesn't include any affirmatives, but that still doesn't mean that you're topical because there's no counter-interpretation at all. So, their interpretation, like, I think we've all implicitly agreed it includes withdrawal laughs. It probably doesn't include Senkaku or Baltics or any of those kind of like clarifications of things. I see a much stronger case for it including Baltics because I think the word all in the treaty would no longer be the word all if it didn't include the Baltics. But so, like I just couldn't wrap my head around the fact that the 2AR both, at least based on my flow, only went for we meet and went for the argument that no AF meets. It's like those two things are just not really working out very well. Like if you, at least based on my flow, and probably I'm wrong because 4 other judges voted the other way, but like if you say the words counter-interpretation, we are meeting, the only possible reading of their interpretation evidence or something like that. I don't know. Then maybe it's a little bit closer. I've got some advice for Michigan, but fuck you, we're debating next, hopefully. So next.
I can go if no one else wants to. So first, I want to echo everything Bricker said. I think also, especially in this debate, you all debated amazing. The T speeches were incredible. So for me, I think the core issue was, does armed attack include anticipatory attacks? I decided that the answer was yes, because the negative evidence is like surprisingly of high quality on this subject, even though it has some specific or the AF evidence is of surprisingly high quality on the subject, even though it has some deficiencies in other areas. So the Avalon card is just like the text of Article 5 and uses the phrase, if such an armed attack occurs. That like specific phrasing of the treaty is important for me because the Gill evidence is like very intentional in defining the word occurred in the context of armed attack. It says an armed attack, quote, occurred at a time it was evident that an attack was going to take place. This card is not quite perfect, and I think the 2NR does a good job identifying why. For example, it's not in the context, or it's in the context of Article 51 instead of Article 5, but it's still quite good. It cites the consensus of international law, the original intent of Article 51, etc. In contrast, the Lion evidence leaves a lot to be desired. First, just strictly in terms of how it is cut, it is unclear exactly in what context the author is intending to define armed attack. It's not explicitly about Article 5, but rather implicitly, at least in my read. The second issue is that it doesn't mention the word occurred, and so this distinction is sort of left completely unanswered in terms of like the AF evidence that I'm looking at. And so even if the AF might not fall strictly under armed attack, it falls under the phrase if such an armed attack occurred, which I think the 2AR at least isolates that phrase and like makes this distinction that they meet that specific phrase. So I spent a lot of time thinking about the above like Article 5 versus Article 51 issue, but I think that the way the AF debated it was quite good, and their evidence in debating is just on par, slightly better than the neg on this issue for me. So Wake has an argument that Article 51 isn't binding, so that this reading of armed attack doesn't fall under their interpretation. But Michigan has the second argument about occurred that I isolated above, and they're the only ones defining this. So even if the reading of armed attack is only about Article 51, the like definition of the word occurred is sort of like the only definition of occurred that I'm left with in the debate, and like the sort of like term of art. So now on the question of whether alliance commitments have to be explicit, written down, binding, etc. I think the AF is honestly very persuasive here in applying the 2NC cross-ex moment where they asked about the sort of Baltic and Senkaku AFs. At least like in my understanding of where this debate shook out by the end, these are topical under the neg's interpretation. But the treaties don't explicitly name these issues, even though they cover them and sort of the neg agrees that they cover them. Similarly, NATO Article 5 doesn't explicitly name anticipatory self-defense under Article 5, but the consensus of international law is that the read of like the most important term of art within the treaty includes it. That was like the stuff I talked about at the start. So given that, I agree with Michigan that if this AF isn't topical, then it's just impossible for me to cohere the AF's or the neg's 2NC explanation about why the Baltics and Senkakus are T. So that was like more or less the essence of my decision.
I agree with everything that's been said. I can't really say it better than either Brick or Hegna about how great it's been to judge you all over the past 2 years. And also just how like you two are all just, I think, universally agreed as like some of the nicest people in the debate community, so pleasant to be around. And we as a community are really lucky to have you. So it's been a joy to watch you over the past 2 years. I saw things similarly to Hegna. I think that they meet your interpretation because I think that armed attack includes and predominantly is seen as anticipatory. The most important evidence, and I won't go through all of them in as much detail unless you want me to, which I'm happy to do, but the Gill evidence was specifically important because of the reading of the plan text and the treaty itself along the terms of what armed attack would mean and whether AFs could reinterpret that. A couple of other issues that were important is one, like before even I arrived at the question of whether armed attack, the AF was a limit of the conditions under which armed attack could be triggered was the broader question of alliance commitment. And there were sort of 2 or 3 prongs that you went for, one of which was the binding nature of it. And I think where I saw them as meeting your interpretation as opposed, and not necessarily like needing a counter interpretation, is that their evidence in debating I thought was persuasive that like there's no binding, first of all, there's no binding treaties now, which your 1NC evidence says like explicitly. So, and second of all, these moments in cross-ex as well as their 1AR we meet evidence is pretty persuasive about reinterpreting things like geographical like limits on the treaty or armed attack. Those are like the 2 words in each treaty across all the topic areas that are vague and require like the AF to limit in some way. And so I think that your 2NR evidence, which I evaluated, is like the beginnings of kind of what you need, but I agree with the 2AR characterization that this evidence is more just about responding to an armed attack, not defining when an attack is initiated or how we would limit the conditions under which it's initiated. And so the combination of those things, I felt like they clearly met your interpretation. There was also the question of reduce, but the primary kind of interpret the 2NR goes for, as well as your evidence is about reduction being a future commitment. And I think that they're the only ones reading evidence that like this is overwhelmingly seen as our predominant commitment. And for the reasons I explained above, I don't think that that has to be explicitly enumerated within the resolution. And the alternative to this would just be that there's no coherent vision of the topic that potentially any AF meets. So this is how I read your interp. This is also what you've said, like AFs, some AFs would be T under, like how you were saying that you could read the Baltics AF or the Senkaku's AF potentially. And so I decided that they meet.
Yeah, I won't give a lot more substance because a lot of what I was going to say is what's already been said. But I do want to reiterate the praise you all have gotten so far. I think there are very few people that end their career, especially here, that are as universally beloved as you do. Like there are just not a lot of people that finish like really long, really fruitful policy debate careers with as few enemies and as universal an acclaim. And I think that that comes from participating in an activity that's as competitive as this one and still just being like, just remarkably kind in a community that is not always that way. And so, you know, retweet on like stuff about Article 51 being similar to Article or being legally relevant for Article 5 and stuff. But I think that you all should relish that accomplishment, which is a thing that like we don't give trophies for, but is a thing that is certainly distinguishes you all from basically everyone else that's competing this year, and a thing that I think you should sort of like reflect on as you're considering the end of your careers and stuff, because that's a real accomplishment on its own.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic 2NC and fantastic 2NR on topicality. Some of the best T debating that I've seen in quite some time. Also, the 1NR on the disad was very good as well. The short and sweet of it is that imminent attack is included in armed attack. There's not a counter definition of armed attack, or at least the negative the affirmative is much better explaining what armed attack means in the context of international law, Article 5 and the UN Charter. I do think that Michigan is playing fast and loose with some of this, specifically some of the distinctions their evidence actually assumes between preemptive attack in imminent situations of threat versus preventative attack against non-imminent threats. I think that their evidence that they're blurring that line significantly. And I think that you could narrow in on a T argument that it's fine to exclude preemptive attack against imminent threats, but that they also preclude preventative attacks, and that's not currently a commitment. So, but this is a new app. It's hard to get into those, you know, the details of their evidence and stuff like that. I also, Michigan, I wonder about, I'm confused about the application of Article 51 because all of your evidence says that Article 51 wouldn't clarify the issue, right? I mean, your entire argument about why it is currently a commitment is that Article 51 says that it's a commitment. So then how would citing Article 5 reduce our commitment to, I mean, how would citing Article 51 reduce our commitment in Article 5? Like that seems counterintuitive. Maybe I'm missing something that I'm not understanding, but it seems to me the plan fundamentally doesn't solve if that's the case. Wake, I'll say I don't know if one of your coaches happened to see that last night I said I was a vagueness hack on Facebook, but this plan is vague. And if you'd gone for the argument, I mean, obviously you didn't debate it, but that would have been a viable position for me, especially in the context of explaining the T violation. You could have used the vagueness argument as a T violation to show how they do not concretely, explicitly reduce commitment in the terms of your moral evidence and stuff like that. But yeah, excellent debate, very close, and good job to everybody.
Since Jay Green is judging, I'm going to fill in his role, but since it's a tradition at the NDT to clap for seniors in their last debate, and since we're not here or together in person, I invite everyone to turn their cameras on, you know, unmute, and let's give a huge round of applause to what a wonderful team, because an amazing career.
Go Deeks.
Yeah, go Deeks, go Blue. Thanks for a great debate, Michigan.
Yeah.
Wish I could give you all hugs, Cam.
Thank you all.